art is something that we drive past every day without giving much of a second thought. My speech aims to inform my professor as well as my fellow classmates of an overview on the history of graffiti and the culture behind it. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you'll have a newfound appreciation for the art form that is so commonly glanced over. Today, I'll be discussing the early growth of the medium, the culture behind street art, and finally how it grew into being an accepted art form. So with all that being said, let's move into my main points. My first main point is the early growth of street art, and according to Goran Blazinski from the Vintage News on November 16, 2016, the style of urban graffiti that most people have seen and know about, the kind that uses spray cans, it seemed to have appeared in Philadelphia in the early 1960s, and by the late 1960s it had reached New York and it was born on the subway trains. Furthermore, according to the art story, New York is where graffiti culture blossomed and matured, and most clearly distinguished itself from all prior art forms of graffiti, as Eric Filsbit, former graffiti artist and lecturer, explains. I think that within these quotes there's a lot of evidence that modern graffiti was something that was born from the 60s and then it began evolving from there. So I have just discussed my first main point, the early growth of street art. So moving on to my second main point, the culture behind graffiti. Now, while many articles say that graffiti was started by gang culture, over time it seems that art form has moved mostly from gang affiliation to skateboarders, hip-hop fans, and artists just wanting the public to see their work. So according to Timothy Warwath in an article published on March 19th of 2006, the people who first began the hip-hop movement were at the bottom of the socioeconomic pyramid. The founders of hip-hop were not born into wealth, but instead were expressing their jealousy towards those who were. In essence, graffiti was an indirect result of a modern response to the class struggle in America that has been going on for generations. I think that this section of the culture of graffiti is interesting and valid, as the early culture was primarily focused on the poverty-stricken side of the culture and gangs wanting to mark their territory. However, over time, it slowly grew into something that many people of any class do. To quote that same article, currently approximately 1/2 of graffiti artists come from white, middle, and upper class homes. So this shows the adoption of the medium and expansion of this art style, moving to all over the United States and many other countries as well. So I have just gone over my second main point, the culture of graffiti. So finally, arriving at my final main point, graffiti becoming a mainstream art form. So many graffiti artists throughout recent years have moved from the streets of their respective towns and moved to their work into art galleries. Some popular examples that you may recognize are Banksy, Shepard Fairey, who's also the owner of Obey, and Futura 2000. According to Singular magazine, published back in 2018, however, the commercialization of their work did not take full effect until after the 1990s when graffiti had reached the mainstream. In more recent years, with the popularity and intrigue for graffiti art growing, a number of street artists, including Banksy, have presented their work in commercial gallery settings. This shows truly how much the art form has grown from being something that was originally thought to be nothing more than vandalism to a respected art form that has a message that was originally not given any thought. To think that a bunch of kids in the 60s using markers and spray cans to put their names on subways would evolve into something that makes city life more vibrant and alive is something that I don't think anyone could have predicted, nor art pieces from graffiti artists selling for millions of dollars. So in conclusion, I have just discussed the early growth, the culture, and mainstream adoption of graffiti. So maybe the next time that you're driving home from school, work, or the grocery store and you see that piece of graffiti, you see a work of art and not vandalism that should be painted over. Thank you.